Certainly missed being with everybody last night at the church dinner. I was traveling. Thankful for safe travels. The weather decided to make it a little bit interesting, and the fog, but you know, you come through Atlanta with your fingers crossed and see what happens, but certainly wasn't too bad. So grateful for that. Grateful for all the Lord had done for us. Grateful for the opportunity of being able to go up and do missions training, which is what that was for some of the groups that I lead. We do a once a year training, and this one was quite interesting and quite thoughtful. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But we're back in the book of Job last week. If you have your lesson there open, we're at Job's crucial crisis. And here we are. We left Job last week on day one of all the things that had happened. It was, of course, the worst day in the history of days, essentially. And so we left Job there, but of course Job's trial doesn't end on day one and doesn't come to a swift resolution by any stretch and means or imagination. There is some differing accounts of how long Job's trial lasts, but routinely it's thought to be 8 months to 12 months long, but there's no real, but the classics are somewhere between 8 to 12 months that Job's trial lasted. There's a few dates and times placed in here, but certainly it was not an overnight event for Job, and things did not quickly get better. And so as we read through the book of Job, we can read through some of that and see some of that that takes place. And we'll bounce around some through the book of Job today, but the lesson text comes from chapter 19, where we're at in the middle of Job and his friends that have came by to encourage him and did the history's worst job of encouraging as they came by. And so you have three friends that, you know, for all they did at least start off with a good time and sit for a week without saying a whole lot, but they eventually begin to say some things, and all of it was wrong, and to the point that they have become the cliche of Job's comforters. But friends like these, who needs enemies? And that's essentially where they are. But we certainly don't want to be that as a sidetrack when we find people who are in trouble, who are in trial. We don't want to be the ones that help push them down into the mud. God calls us to help push people up. But in Job chapter 19, we'll read the scripture reading for the lesson and skip through the chapter a little bit. Job chapter 19 and verse 6, "Know now that God hath overthrown me and hath compassed me with his net. Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment. He hath fenced up my way that I cannot pass, and he hath set darkness in my path. He hath stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. He hath destroyed me on every side. I am gone, and mine hope hath he removed like a tree. He hath also kindled his wrath against me, and he hath counted me unto him as one of his enemies. He hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintances are verily estranged from me. My kinsfolk have failed, and my familiar friends have forgotten me. They that dwell in mine house and my maids count me for a stranger. I'm an alien in their sight. I called my servant, and he gave me no answer. I entreated him with my mouth. My breath is strange to my wife, and though I entreated for my children's sake of mine own body. Yea, young children despised me. I arose, and they spake against me. All my inward friends abhorred me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. My bone cleaveth to my skin and my flesh, and I am escaped with the skin of my teeth. Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. So we find Job in his crisis, and we're nearing the apex of Job's crisis where we are here. We're at the part where he is in the middle of this response to his friends, and they'll speak, and then Job speaks. And we can see that Job's life overall is in shambles. His situation had brought the disdain of his guests, his maids, his personal servant, and it was though as all his relationships had been turned upside down. Now, Job was a man who just a few days ago, everybody wanted to be his friend. Job was the most powerful man in the land of Uz, and just was the man. Everybody wanted to be Job's friend, and Job went nowhere without honor. Job went nowhere without people looking up to him. Job went nowhere without people wanting to stand beside him. Job went Job went nowhere without having people saying, "Oh, this is Job, and I want to stand near Job, and I want to be Job's friend, and I want to just maybe some of that Job luck will run off. Some of that Job luck will rub off on me. Maybe if I stand near Job, I'll get lucky too." Job's so lucky. Everything he does turns to gold. He's got the Midas touch. And I'm going to go stand by Job, and maybe I want to be Job's friend. I want to be seen in Job's company. But now Job can't get anybody to return his phone calls. And everybody that he reaches out to that was formerly his friend can no longer have anybody that wants to discuss. He gets left on red when he sends text messages, and all this happens that nobody reaches back out to Job, and all my friends are gone. All my servants don't even answer my call. They don't recognize who I am. I've changed so much in my appearance that you can't even recognize me as the same person that I was. And so he feels like a besieged city. Everything has went wrong for Job. Feels like an army has built a siege ramp, and they brought up their battering rams, and they're trying to penetrate my last defenses, and he's just a weak human being. And the attack of all that has happened has overpowered him, and he's in shambles, and he's just don't understand what's going on. To the point that at this point in time, Job is an elder of the city, and one of the carnal evils, I guess if you would say, of his time, when he says, "Young children despise me." Now, in our estimation, that is really not that big of a deal, unfortunately, in our social norms of today, for young children to despise me. But in Job's time, that was the absolute most abhorrent social norm on the paradigm. You honored the elderly. There's a story in the Bible where the children make fun of a prophet, and the bear comes out and eats them. And so this is the absolute worst of the social norm. Job's been absolutely inverted. I had a cousin of mine that when he went over to serve in Iraq, he says their social norms are so different than ours that at the apex is the elderly men, and they're the chief, and they're the head honchos of the tribe. And if you work very much in our culture, we respect the elderly, but certainly not to the respect that they have. I've worked in several tribes and doing medical missions in the tribes, and it's their custom, and so you try to work within their customs as much as you can, and realize this is just totally different, and you have to take your mindset and you turn it different. But every person that you speak with when you're doing your medical exam, you don't talk to them. You talk to the head honcho for the tribe, and he sits down and he tells you what's wrong with the person, and you're trying to have a conversation with the person, and he answers all the questions because he's the leader. He knows everything that's going on, and he answers all the questions. Eventually, you learn to politely work your way around that and work within their social customs. But in the norm, he's the leader of all things. Whatever he says goes. If he thinks that you're sick, you're sick. If he don't think you're sick, you're not sick. And so for Job to be made fun of by children, the social inversion, he had went from being the apex in chapter 1, if we look at chapter 1 in the book of Job, there's a very simple introduction to the book of Job. Is there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That's all you needed to know at his time frame to know who he was. So he is at the apex of the social ladder, but now through everything that's happened, he's been inverted, and he's now at the bottom end of the social rung. So everything, as we think about, and we talked last week at length about all the things that Job had lost, and all the things that he had not, that had went away in a single day, but we're now to the point that as bad as day one was, it hadn't got any better. This has continued down the slide of now, we've now went from, oh my goodness, Job has had such a horrible day, to, oh my goodness, what's Job done wrong? And he had this hidden sin. If you read through the comments that his friends, so-called friends, had made for him, that his friends had made for him, and they say, obviously you're doing something wrong here. Obviously you're not doing something right. God's punishing you. Surely, in Job 8:6, Bildad says, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now God would awake for thee and make the habitation of thy righteousness prosperous. In Job 11, Zophar told Job that God is probably punishing you less than what you deserve. Such good friends that they were. But everybody had waited when all these bad things had happened, and okay, it's going to get better, Job. Well, then it never got better. So therefore, Job must be doing something wrong. And so Job has continued, as I said, to slide down the social ladder. So he's lost everything, and we're now to the point that Job begins to question where he is. And we see that Job kind of descends into this place, and we see Job kind of get there. And when you look at this happened and continues to happen, and then when you thought that it might get better, we start off with a trial of destitution. We start off that he had lost all of his material goods. We start off that his livestock, his livelihood, all of that, all these important matters of these physical accoutrements of how rich that he was, all that is gone. And he's now frustrated by that loss. And then he has the bereavement that happens. We talked about in the heels of losing all his financial standing. He loses all 10 of his children in a single day in a windstorm. And know the emotions of losing all of those and the shockwave that goes off. But as bad as they are to that point, that was just chapter 1. Now we read chapter 2. And there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. Now, at this point after chapter 1, we're ready for Paul Harvey for the rest of the story and for things to get better. We're ready for things to start climbing back up. We're ready for, that was a bad day. Let's make it better. Well, that's not what happens. The Lord says to Satan, from whence cometh thou? And Satan answered and said, I, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said to Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? Yet again, for the second time, the Lord brings up Job. And there was none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity. Though thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore bulls from the sole of his foot to his crown. And he took a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and sat down among the ashes. So once again, he's put out. Another trial comes to place. So as bad as Job's trial had seemed to this point, it wasn't over yet. And Satan wasn't satisfied because he hadn't abandoned his faith or he hadn't cursed God. So Satan asked permission to bring this physical affliction upon Job's body, and God allows it to happen. As difficult as financial trouble is, physical affliction is even worse. The saying for a friend of mine is the first wealth is health, and then we've all heard that people spend all their health to get wealth and then spend all their wealth to get health. Job is in this place where he's despondent. He's sitting among the ashes, which symbolizes his grief and despondency, and he's essentially in the town dump. He had been ostracized out. No one knew, and of course we don't know what particular sickness that he had. He's covered in boils, and I'm certain that Satan cooked up a nice ripe concoction of illnesses for Job to have. And certainly it was probably something incredibly interesting from a medical standpoint. Glad I didn't have to diagnose it, because it's this handmade disease that Satan had made for Job to make him as miserable as possible. You get a broken arm and it starts to heal, and that itches and hurts. You have some hip pain and the weather changes and that hurts. Now, those are just the natural illnesses and of living life. And just imagine how bad Job hurt and how bad his itching was whenever he has a special concoction made by Satan. So certainly he's suffering, and sometimes we suffer because we're just human. It happens to us all. I remember the young men telling me that one day my back would ache, the old men were telling me that one day when I was a young man, my back was ache. They were right. So one day you'll regret doing that. They were right. So, you're just gonna get old, despite what we all like to think and all like to do. It will happen to us. And as one comedian said, one day right now you may have muscles in your earlobes, but it's going to come to pass, as the Bible says. That all too will pass. It's just going to happen. Sometimes things happen to us because we're human, and it's just humankind, and it's the fallen state of man for illness to come upon us. It's the fact that we're just all beset by the burden of sin and the fall from grace of Adam and Eve, and it just comes upon us. Sickness comes upon us as individuals, not as a result of sin in our personal life. It just happens. Certainly in Job's life, that he had done nothing wrong. It just was. So Job has a trial of just loss. He has this trial of destitution. He's got bankruptcy and bereavement, and then this trial of affliction spiritually, or this trial of affliction physically comes along. And of all the time of all that, we met Job in chapter 19, where he's in this trial of isolation, adding to his trial of loss of just stuff, the stuff of life. Job, that's a bad day, but we can get over that. Physically, he's now physically ill, to the point that as much as Job had a bad day, has lost physical, he probably was the sickest man ever in history and still be alive. And the most miserable man physically. We're on to the trial of isolation. Added to his destitution and affliction was the trial of isolation. Those closest to him, his dearest companions and his friends, turned from him. Job was smitten with boils. His wife tells him to curse God and die. And as much as Job went through the rough things, so did his wife. Right? But then he's got friends who supposedly come to comfort him and aren't, again, notorious for their lack of everything, of all that could happen, of all the things that they could say. Eliphaz says, "Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, and where were the righteous cut off? I have seen they have plowed iniquity and sow wickedness, they reap the same." So he's saying, you're obviously not a righteous person, that you were just faking it the whole time, that you had inward secret sin. And Job says, that's not what happened. That's not what's happening. And so he's in the middle of this. And this is where we find Job today, at this apex of where he's at. That he's at this crisis of where he's sitting. We meet Job today at this, as bad as it was, it got worse and continued to get worse. I spent part of this week, the latter end of this week, traveled as I was not able to be there last night. I traveled up to Tennessee to the headquarters for Christian Medical and Dental Association, and we do the once a year training. The training this year was on crisis and crisis planning. Now there's this organization. We work with several different groups. We have a when bad things happen call number when we leave the trip. So one of the things that they give us is a piece of paper, and you take it physically, and in case of you lose your cell phone, in the case of everything else happens, this is the number that you need to have written down on a piece of paper. If you got to get a landline and you get one phone call out, this is the number that you call. And that's a group that comes, and they're set up to medically evac us. If we have somebody that gets seriously sick, they will send a plane, send a helicopter, send whatever is needed, send a vehicle to come take that person out. If the whole team gets to a place that, from a safety standpoint, we had a team a year or so ago, and they were never physically unsafe. The countryside around them had decided they didn't like what the government was doing, so they decided to start just taking pickaxes to the roads and cutting big holes in the roads and burning tires. And they said, well, if we don't get out now, we'll never be able to get out because it's just going to continue to deteriorate. And again, they were safe, but there was no other travel. And so they arranged for them to, they called this company, and they arranged for them to be able to get out of country earlier than they had planned. And so there's that number that you call. And then there's the other number that you have when things go really bad. And those were the ones that talked to us this week, and that's the number you really hope to never have to call. They're the hostage negotiators, and the ones that when things are going really bad, this is the number that you call. And this is the part that Job is at, but this week was about crisis planning and the things to do in crisis. And as I was sitting and rereading over this lesson and sitting and begin to think about, we had spent the day learning about crisis and incident training, about safety, security, and the things to do, and the fact that you should have a crisis plan. And I began to look at this, and I began to look at Job and look at it in a little bit different light. And how was Job able to stay? And how was Job able to live, and how was he able to continue where he was at? And this guy that's doing this training had, long-term, had spent his whole life doing this. His dad was a missionary and had done Bible translation, and this guy was kind of he had been a police officer, then on the FBI team, and had done hostage negotiation and all of this. And he said one day I asked Dad, what y'all's plan? And he said, I looked at it and said, well, that's not good enough. And so he created his dad's organization that his dad worked with, made them a safety plan. And then he looked and said, well, we just do this for all missionary organizations, and they do it volunteer. He does it on apparently on one side for like the executives and gets paid for it, and then he does it for missionaries as a volunteer. And so he talked to us about developing, and our group has it, and we just went through our crisis plan and all these things that we do. But I began to think about, there's these things. I remember this one slide that he had up there, and he says, these are the things that you do. Doesn't matter what happens, doesn't matter what you're going through. These are the things that you do, and these are the things that you don't do. And it says this works. When you get to these situations, these are the things that you do. This is your fallbacks of no matter how bad the situation is, this is what you do. And I began to look at Job's life, and I began to look at the things that he's saying, and I began to read through the verses of all the things that Job was saying, and I realized that Job had a fallback plan. No matter how bad that it was, we see over and over Job reiterates these things. We over and over see Job saying certain things that he says over and over. That it didn't matter what had happened, and Job in no way had planned this day, this week. Again, this lasts for probably 12 months, 8 to 12 months, the entire Job's trial that happens through this, and he's been going through it day after day, and it seemed like things were getting bad, and they're going to get worse. But he had no plans for this. There's no way to plan this life. Sometimes trouble comes. Sometimes you get that phone call in the middle of the night. Sometimes you get that phone call and what happened? There's no way that you plan for that. Yeah. But we can look at Job's positions. And Job says, number one, Job's crisis plan. Number one, remember God is faithful. And Job says in 19 verse 25, he says, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and he will stand in the latter day upon the earth." Job says, I don't know what's happening, and I don't understand why it's happening. I don't understand why all this happened to me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wasn't. But here he was. He says, the one thing I do know is that my Redeemer liveth. In verse 7, he says, "Behold, I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there is no judgment." Job said, this isn't fair for what happened to me. If righteous judgment was taking place, this would not be happening to me. But sometimes I realize life isn't fair. Job chapter 3, we can look and read in Job chapter 3 and verse 25. "For the one thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come unto me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet. Yet trouble come." Job says, I didn't do anything wrong. Just as a reminder, as you're sitting here and you're talking to me and you're questioning what I was, this is the last thing that is said that Job says as a reminder to his friends as they begin to pummel him with their accusations. Job says, I didn't do anything wrong. But I realize in Job's crisis plan that he remembers that, number one, God is faithful. Number two, sometimes life isn't fair. Number three, I didn't do anything wrong. So Job in his fallback plan, as we see this, as Job says, I don't understand what happens and how do we survive this? The question for this lesson is, one day bad things are going to happen to us. I've fortunately never received the phone call, but sometime something is going to occur. Sometime we're going to get the news that we don't want to get. Sometime we're going to get, and I don't understand why this happened, why this tragedy took place in my life. And there are those of here that are with us that have gotten that phone call where they don't understand why this tragedy happened. But as we understand that one day it will happen, how do I survive? How am I like Job in the middle of all of this? How do I get to the place that I can say that I remember that my Redeemer liveth? These are the base points. These are the foundations that no matter what happens in our life, no matter what we go through, no matter what bad things happen, there's certain things that we must remember. First of all, we can be like Job and say, I didn't do anything wrong. This sometimes just happens to us. Sometimes sickness occurs to us. Sometimes we get that diagnosis because of things that we did and that we pay for things that we did to our bodies. And sometimes it just happens because we're human. And in the end, we must remember this. We must remember in our thoughts. We must remember in our plans. But how, as much as we were trained a little bit over this weekend, and they talk about here's the things that you must do in the middle of all of this that happens. There's these few steps that you must take. This is the first step that you take. Doesn't matter what happens. This is the first step that you take. And the second step, this is the phone number that you call. If you only get one phone number out, you call this one phone number. This is what you do no matter what's going on. You must remember these basics. You must remember to do these things. You must remember to take these steps. This is how you get out of the crisis, is you begin to take these steps. And this is what Job is showing us in today's lesson, is this is how we get out of a crisis. As we begin to take these steps, we begin to walk and say, first of all, I remember that my Redeemer liveth, that he is faithful. Doesn't matter what happens, that he is faithful. May not seem like it right now. It may not seem like this is what's going on. It may not seem like that this is what's going on. And I don't understand. And sometimes life isn't fair. And I have to remember that I don't understand all of this that's going on. But yet we can be and we can understand, as he does, that good will prevail. that we must understand, that we may know there is a judgment, as much as he says if judgment, there is no judgment. In verse 7 in chapter 19, he says there is no judgment. But in verse 29, he remembers and he reminds us that there will be a judgment. That in the end, good will prevail. In the end, the final Paul Harvey event, the rest of the story eventually will happen. We might be a few chapters in. It may last longer than what I want, but in the end, Job says that the righteous will prevail. It may not even be here on this earth. It may not be in a place that I can see, but I realize that the righteous will prevail. But Job says even in the time frame of all this happens, and we can see that Job reiterates this in Job chapter 13 and verse 15, where he says, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I will maintain mine own ways before him. Job says that judgment that I'm looking for, that righteous judgment when things are corrected, it may not happen in my time frame. And it may not happen in a place. I may die where I'm at. Though may he slay me, yet will I trust him. What powerful words that Job says when people come to him and his friends are mocking him and his friends are making fun of him and his friends are saying, you've done wrong. Job says, I haven't done wrong. But yet, in the middle of all this, Job goes back to saying, these are the truths that I hold on to. These are the truths that I know no matter what situation that I'm in. It doesn't matter what situation has happened. It doesn't matter what's happened to me in my life. It doesn't matter what tumult that has come upon me. I remember these things. And this is how Job shows us how to get out of the place that we're at, how to get out of the place of how to survive the crisis with my integrity intact. I'll survive this crisis knowing that I did not sin before God. I didn't understand what had happened. It was rough. I prayed. I made sure I hadn't done anything, but I haven't done anything. I know where I'm at. We are introduced to Job in chapter 1 that he made prayers for himself. God, make sure there's nothing wrong in my life. And he does the same thing for his children. Make sure there's nothing wrong in their life inadvertently that we may have sinned. Forgive us of anything that we had done. So when this trial starts, Job says, I know that I haven't done anything wrong. Sixth thing that Job remembers is God knows where I am. In chapter 23 and verse 10, he knoweth the way that I take. When he trieth me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot hath held his steps. His way have I kept and not declined. Job says, when I get to the end of this, I'll realize that he knows where I was at the whole time. We talked some last week about knowing that he knows where we're at in our hardest troubles and in our hardest trials. And Job says that even today is my complaint bitter, and he says, what happened to me is more than I can bear, and what happened to me is more than I can even tell you about. My stroke is heavier than my groaning, and oh, that I knew where I might find him. Oh, that I might even come to his seat, that I might order my cause before him, that I could fill my mouth with arguments, that all these things that I could say, the righteous might dispute with him, that I might be delivered, that I may go forward. He is not there, and I go backward, that I cannot perceive him on the left hand where he doth work, but I cannot behold him. He hideth himself on his right hand. I can't see him. But Job said in the middle of all this, one thing I remember, he knoweth the way that I take. I may not know where God is in the middle of my crisis. I may not know all the things that we are. We were reminded this week, and this gentleman that was doing training for us, he unfortunately had stories of things that had happened. He said we had one missionary that had been kidnapped, and the kidnappers had tried to tell him, we've kidnapped your wife. We went back and we've got your wife and we got your children. And the guy that was kidnapped said, I knew that hadn't happened because I knew what our crisis plan was. When something happens, everybody else gets out of the country. Because he knew what was happening, even though he said, I may not be able to change my situation, but I have people that are working on the situation. And always remember, it's the one thing that the crisis management tells us, and we hope that you never need us, but you should understand that if you ever do we're going to be there. You will not know that we're there. You will not know that we are. You will not know that you will not be able to reach out, will not be able to contact you, will not be able to talk to you, will not be able to even know. They said it might be a while, but you should realize that we will be there and we will be working in your defense. Everything that we can do, we'll be working with. And they go through the list of we'll be working with the State Department, and these are the people that we'll go through, and this is what they were training us. And sometimes in our life, when we get to these situations, I may not know where God is, but God does know where I'm at. It may seem like I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but He has not forsaken me, that He will walk with me. These things that we must remember in the middle of our crisis. The book here puts it in three different ways. Job remembers three things. He recognized the importance of these things about God that we need to understand. Number one, that God is our Redeemer. In Job chapter 19 and 25, I've read the verse, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and He will stand on the latter day upon the earth." Though Job was suffering, and he thought, as we talked last week, that this is the hand of God that is doing this to him, still his faith rose above that situation, and he saw God as his Savior and as Redeemer. Job says, "I remember that my God is faithful, and He is my Redeemer." Job realized that He is my refiner. In verse 23 and 10, he says, as I just read, "He knoweth the way that I take, and when He hath tried me, it shall come forth as gold." He knows where I'm at. He knows the process that I'm going through. He's walking with me through this. I may not see Him. I may not be able to contact Him. I may feel for Him and not find Him. As Job says in the earlier verses of that chapter, I reach for Him and I can't find Him, but I know that He's there. And this is how Job survives his crisis, and how we too will survive ours. That Job says, the things that I remember. The last thing that Job remembers is that he relied on God as his rewarder. In the end, that good will prevail. In the end, I may not understand what is happening, but in the end, good will prevail. In the end, God will prevail. It may not be in this world. It may not be where I'm at here. It may not be in a situation that I understand. It may not be in a place that I can see it happening. It may not be in a place that it may happen in a time that I don't understand, in a way that I don't understand. But I do realize that it will happen. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him, and he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Hebrews chapter 11. Job reaches his crisis point. His faith won out. That in the middle of all of this, whenever he's boiled down to the absolute place that he's at, when he gets down to, as we would say, where the rubber meets the road, and in Job's case, well beyond that, and well beyond what would be norm, well beyond what would be understandable, well beyond what we would say would be capable of being born. But Job is at this place. We may be frustrated with our present circumstances, and we may suffer great trials in our life, and they may continue for some time. This may not just be a day or this, or may not be a week of this, but we can say that we realize that God is faithful. We can hold on to Him. We can hold on in our faith. Even when we can't locate God, we know that God knows where we are. When we feel that no one understands or cares, God does. Psalms remind us, as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear Him, for He knoweth our frame. He remembers that we are dust. He does know the way that we're taking. And in our trial, in our situation, we can come forth as gold. We realize, as I'd said before, that there's an end to this book of Job. We realize that last chapter is coming. We realize that there's something that's going to happen. And so in our life, we go, okay, we can just keep reading. I can just keep flipping pages. Sooner or later, I'll flip to the end of the book. We'll get to Job chapter 42. All this ends. But Job, on his 6th month, he's 6 months into this. How long is this going to take? If we use the classic 12-month calendar, then Job's halfway done. He suffered for 6 months. All this happened, and he doesn't realize that he's still got a ways to go. But he does emerge forth as he were, because Job remembered these things. He remembered that God was faithful and that He is my Redeemer. He remembered sometimes life isn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong, and God will prevail. I'll keep doing right. No matter if he slays me, no matter what happens, I'll keep doing what is right for him. In the end, he's my rewarder. In the end, he's my refiner. In the end, he's my redeemer. Man, we can survive what happens to us when our pain points have reached. When we get to this point, and it may seem like the unjust are prospering. It may seem like that only bad things are happening to be. But we can remember that in the end, if we stay faithful to him, that we'll come through as gold. Man, good to be here this morning.